Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Jacob Manning. I'm the Advocacy and Policy Manager here at SBAM. And we want to start off today by welcoming in a new member, Sharp Impact and owner Stephanie. Thanks for joining and welcome to SBAM. So, Brian, it's spring break, one of the busiest travel weeks of the whole year. And we had been hearing last week about these 5 hour wait times and TSA lines, people missing their flights. Can you explain what was going on there and what changed last week?
Yeah, there was so it was kind of a roller coaster of a week, and Friday was, let's say, kind of like a deadline of sorts, and the deadline is created by the next pay period of TSA agents. So it would have been the next time that TSA agents would have skipped a paycheck, and they had already skipped a full paycheck before and a partial one before that. There was a bill that had passed in the Senate, and it went over to the House. That bill was essentially a partial funding bill, and but it stalled in the House. There was a disagreement on what was left out of the bill, and so at that point, what the president did, let's see, on Friday, March 27, signed a presidential memorandum directing the Department of Homeland Security, which is what the TSA is part of, to immediately pay TSA workers, and this was under uh, under essentially an emergency order. So it indicated that the lack of TSA agents, the lack of paid TSA agents was creating a national emergency. And so they're paid really outside of the regular appropriations process under emergency powers. So um, there might be some challenge to that, I suppose, at some point. But that challenge would likely take longer to work its way through the process than to ultimately have this resolved at some point. So from a travel standpoint, that's, I'm sure, good and welcome news that the TSA agents are being paid again, which so workforce of between 50 and 60,000 people. And we'd heard different estimates on, f folks not showing up for work or getting other jobs and that sort of thing. And it was starting to mount. At first, it was just impacting certain airports, and it was spreading to others the longer that it went on. And so, at least there is a reprieve here in the middle of all this. Not a permanent solution, but something that keeps or gets the airports maybe a little more operating more closely to normal.
So, staying with another long developing topic, we've been talking for the last couple of weeks about the situation in the Middle East with the conflict in Iran. So, have there been any new developments in this situation?
There haven't been any developments that would signal that there's some sort of an immediate end. The president has definitely talked about um, talks progressing and being encouraging, although the other side hasn't characterized it in the same way. And there is some question over who has the authority to negotiate and who's talking to who and all that sort of thing. There was, though, also a move to put some additional forces in the Middle East beyond what is already stationed there. And there's normally a pretty healthy deployment at any given time in the region, and that is now up or has been moving up in recent weeks. And that could be strategic from a negotiation standpoint to show strength in the middle of a negotiation, or it could mean that some other phase is close. But either way, the uncertainty around it does continue. So the turmoil in the stock market and the higher energy costs, as long as those supply lines are disrupted or in question, are going to, at least for the foreseeable future, that uncertainty is going to be with us.
So, moving a little closer to home, the weather, of course, is getting warmer. We have a beautiful day today. Some people say that that means that we're getting closer to summer, but what it really means is that we're just getting a little closer to election season. We have a lengthy Election Watch 2026 segment this week, and we're going to start this week by talking about the Republican Endorsement Convention, which took place this weekend. Brian, could you explain to us what is the process of these conventions, what happens here, and what is decided?
Yeah, there's so people are familiar with primary elections where you go in August and you elect in the primary which candidates are going to represent the Democrats on the ticket and which t candidate is going to represent the Republicans on the ticket. And for November. So it narrows down at that point. But there are certain positions as per our Constitution in Michigan where it's not narrowed down by the convention, or I'm sorry, by a primary election, but it's done by a political party convention. And two of those most high profile races are the Attorney General and the Secretary of State. So you may have noticed that you have never voted unless you're a Republican precinct delegate or a Democratic precinct delegate. You've never voted in a primary for a Secretary of State candidate or an Attorney General candidate. So the parties hold conventions of their own precinct delegates. They select their own candidacies. And that what they have taken, that used to happen later in the summer in August, but and it technically still does, but the parties have now started to move that process up so they could endorse a candidate that will be nominated in the future in October in August, but they can start their campaign early, and so that happened over the weekend. The Republicans held their convention, and in their convention they selected candidates.
So I think looking at what ended up happening, which we can dive into, a lot of people said that the results were relatively, things went pretty easy. Things went quicker. There weren't a lot of runoff ballots that were required. Could you talk to us about who came out with the endorsements in the Attorney General and Secretary of State races?
Yeah, so to be clear, of this last weekend, it was just the Republicans that had their convention. And in that convention, both the Secretary of State and Attorney General elections were contested. However, those who came out were Tony Forlini, who for Secretary of State. He is the clerk um, in the Macomb County government, so an elected official in Macomb County and former state representative. So Tony Forlini coming out, generally thought to be a strong candidate. So in the last election, Republicans were totally clobbered in the Secretary of State election. And generally, people say or kind of acknowledge that the Republicans chose the worst possible candidate. And it was a candidate that voters soundly rejected, and it was not close. It was an embarrassing defeat. And so this time they bypassed weaker candidates and went with who was kind of objectively speaking, probably their strongest candidate. Somebody who has credibility in government, has got some experience, and is a countywide elected official in one of the most important electoral colleges, especially for Republicans in the state. So Secretary of State race. And then Prosecutor Lloyd out of Eaton County is the person. So another countywide elected official, a prosecutor in Eaton County, was selected as the Attorney General candidate for the Republicans. So both highly credible people that it kind of sends a signal. I'm just going to be blunt about this and say that Republicans maybe are sick of losing and choosing candidates that are not particularly electable. And so they went with candidates that are more electable, folks that have a resume that you might look at it and say, okay, this is a person qualified for the job. And that is kind of a turning point as compared to some of the decisions in the recent conventions that ended in not just defeats, but wide margin defeats in recent elections.
So we have a bit of clarity on the Republican side of the ticket. What could we expect on the Democratic side?
So they have their endorsement convention coming up. So they never do it on the same weekend. They separate these out. And but theirs is coming right up. And the Democrats race is also highly contested. And for both of these elections, but it's the Secretary of State race on the Democratic side that is the most that has the most firepower in it. The ones that where you have multiple candidates that are well known and have been elected. you've got current Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist. So he had run for governor, decided to drop out of that race and get in the Secretary of State race, and has done so with several endorsements of high-level organization labor union endorsements that count for a lot in the convention among the Democrats. And then, but you also have Barb Byram, who's a county clerk in Ingham County, former state representative as well, and uh, Susanna Schrinkelli, who is who is Jacob remind me is the
Former lottery commissioner.
yeah the lottery commissioner,
Yeah.
had to resign that position to run for office, and but was Governor Whitmer's lottery commissioner, and so that's among the Democrats running for Secretary of State, and that's a strong field. So they've got three high level people among that party that are running for it. Now, for the on the Attorney General side, you've got Eli Savitt and William Noakes that are running, but the what appears to me to be like the clear front runner um, is Karen McDonald, and she is the prosecutor in Oakland County, so the Oakland County prosecutor running for Attorney General. And so we'll see who comes out of those, but the Democrats have some pretty big names that are running as well. So they had no trouble at all recruiting top level candidates. So Republicans put their best foot forward. Democrats look like they're poised to do the same thing. An election that where Michigan's right at the center of it. It seems like everything's on the ballot this year, and so lots of this. I do expect those races, even when you have elections that are kind of otherwise lopsided for one side or the other. Historically, Republicans choosing weak candidates recently notwithstanding, these elections can be competitive because they're very administrative type roles. They do play out in political ways, but they're the types of elections that can be competitive even when the top of the ticket isn't.
And the Democratic Party state nominated convention will be Sunday, April 19th. So about 3 weeks from now, we can have an update on that one. Now, looking at the gubernatorial election, we're about 4 months out from the August primaries, August 4th. A poll came out last week in the Republican primary and brought some interesting results. We haven't seen many polls yet polling the Republican Party. I think this is the first one that I've seen. What can you tell us about what it showed us?
So what we had seen up until this point looked a lot like name ID polls, and John James had kind of runaway higher name ID than everybody else, and so he had been leading heftily in polls. But a lot of those polls tend to be general election polls where they did what are called crosstabs and just separated out of those which are Republican primary voters and who were their preferences, and so smaller sample sizes. This was a poll that was just aimed at Republican primary voters, and the reason that it was timely is that it was a few months after Perry Johnson got in with a very large budget to raise up his name ID and to launch his candidacy, spending millions and millions of dollars. And so the question was, how fast can those numbers move, and how solid is the support with John James? And now there's other candidates, of course, that are running, but John James was the front runner. And if somebody was to beat him, they needed to crack into that lead. And this did show a within margin of error type of a race between Perry Johnson and John James. Now, with the Republican primary polls, I think you do kind of have to take it with a grain of salt because people don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to at this stage of the calendar. Those of us who pay a lot of attention to politics are watching every move of the process carry out. Regular people out there living their lives really aren't thinking about these races probably yet. But the fact that that numbers had moved to where James and Perry Johnson seemed somewhat um, even in this poll is a pretty big move in a relatively short period of time, especially when you consider that there's still another 4 months to go before the primary election is up. Now, Jacob, I think you have the numbers all the way up and down that ticket. Might be interesting for people to kind of set the stage in terms of where everybody is.
Yeah, so currently there are five candidates that are in the race in the game for Republicans, and leading the pack, even in this poll, is Congressman John James, who polled 23% of the group that was polled. Perry Johnson was at 20%, so just 3 points lower than James. The next candidate is former Attorney General Mike Cox, so quite a big drop off. To that one, Cox was at 6%. Senate Minority Leader Eric Nesbitt was at 5%, and former Speaker of the House Tom Leonard was at 4%. So, still the biggest chunk of everybody polled is the 44% undecided. So, still 4 months to go, but certainly encouraging numbers for Perry Johnson compared to where you'd expect.
And I thought another thing that was kind of interesting that has developed since like the once one candidate starts spending, it kind of sets it requires that others start launching their campaign at that type of a level, running ads and things. And so you do see Senator Eric Nesbitt, who is up now on TV and socials with a commercial. Of course, we've mentioned Perry Johnson has a lot of firepower, a lot of weight and gross ratings points behind his message. And John James, or at least a super PAC, I think that's supporting John James that is has gone up on TV as well with some ads, and of course pretty active on social. And then right along the way, Mike Cox had been spending at least a modest amount each month in in raising name ID and getting the word out. So all of those candidates are active at a level that looks different today. And I think that really was driven by just when one candidate starts a serious spend, everybody else has got to it really has to get going, or else they run the risk of a sense of inevitability building behind another candidate. I will mention that on the other side, we're just talk about the Republican side here, because with the Democrats, they've really have essentially chosen their candidate. Jocelyn Benson will be the nominee. There technically is another candidate, Chris Swanson, and certainly no disrespect to Sheriff Swanson, Sheriff of Genesee County, but in terms of every single indication, really, it very much looks like it's inevitable to be Jocelyn Benson. Then, of course, there's the independent candidacy of Mike Duggan. And Mike Duggan had been spending pretty significantly on name ID, especially outstate, and basically lives on the road as well. So you really do have very, very active candidates that are vying for this position of governor. And I think from here on out, it's for all of them, it's a breakneck pace.
Okay, so it is right now legislative spring break. So there is not a lot of movement right now going on in the legislature. The Senate was in last week, the House was not, and now both chambers are off for spring break. But there was some movement last week on a bill that we wanted to put on your guys' radar. I'm pasting uh, a link in the chat right now, which is to an article on our website that we wrote last week about this legislation that seeks to create an automatic IRA mandate. So this bill package is two bills in the Senate, Senate Bill 807 and 808. And these bills passed out of Senate committee last week. We've also seen a sort of continued year after year effort to get this through in the House as well. There was a bill that almost passed in the House. It got an appropriation that passed to help implement it, but the actual policy never got passed. So that happened last term in the legislature. And then this term in the legislature, it was brought back as a package of bills, two bills, one sponsored by a Democrat, one sponsored by a Republican. And essentially, what these bills would do, both in the House and the Senate, they're mirror bills, is that they would require employers to facilitate an automatic IRA program. So, Brian, could you explain to the audience why this is something that we're concerned about? and what this would look like for employers.
Yeah, this is it's a mandate bill, and even though those that are pushing it and those that support it have the best of intentions, they want employees to save more for their retirement. We want employees to save more too. I think most employers do. But this is a mandatory enrollment. So each business would have to go through the government. Each business would have to do one of two things: either go out and set up a 401k on their own, or enroll all of their employees through this government process. And they always they promise it won't come at any cost, and it'll be super easy to do. And I've never seen a government program be super easy to enroll in. I mean, maybe this would be the first one in the history of mankind, but probably not. It'll be a difficult system. There'll be all kinds of kinks and bugs in it. They'll the it's the sort of thing where we just don't want any more mandates on businesses, because that's what we hear from small businesses. It's just lighten up on the mandates. There's enough employment rules already, still kind of reeling from the changes that were made last year. And so that's what we do oppose this bill. We've always opposed this concept that there would be some sort of mandatory participation in a retirement system. But I will say that there are no and low cost options for employees and small businesses already. I mean, we even have an association retirement plan where businesses can enroll and their employees can have access, and they can decide whether to do a match or not. But also, any employee could go to any brokerage firm and just set up an IRA or a Roth IRA, and have an automatic payroll deduction going into that IRA. That's essentially what the government is talking about setting up here. And but doing it through state government, a mandatory enrollment process, and just something we think is really unnecessary because it's already available to employees, whether it's through their employee or their employer or not. And so we're really encouraging them to pull back on this, or if they did want to do it, do not make participation in it mandatory. And so we will continue to educate the legislature about how these ideas, as well-meaning as they are, it's yet another obstacle, just a pile on, one more thing that employers have to do on top of the other hundreds of things that the government already requires of them.
Yes, and so that's a bill that now moves to the full Senate. It has not been voted out of the full Senate yet and would not be considered until after spring break. But we have let members of the Michigan Senate know that the reasons that Brian stated why we oppose it. And just to clarify, this is not a bill that requires a match for employers. It would only require that employers facilitate the program, but still something that employers would have to keep up with. And another thing that we'd be potentially concerned about is that employers who do not already offer a qualifying program would be required to facilitate it, but also it's an automatic opt-in. So employees uh, would have to opt out so that they don't have automatic deductions. The automatic deduction in amount would be determined by a board, which would be established by the law. Uh, but unless an employee uh, specifically opts out of being included in the program, they would start having these deductions automatically applied to their paycheck. So something that we'll continue to monitor throughout the process, uh, but just something we wanted to put on your radar
Yeah.
as well.
So, and just to like paint a picture here, so people can understand, like, what, even though this thing, they say, well, it won't cost employers anything, and employees could opt out. But just imagine, you got employees, you got some employees are very proactive and they're right on top of stuff, and you got other employees that maybe are less so. And like the idea that there's a deduction automatically from their paycheck unless they take the proactive step of opting out. It's not up to you, the employer. It's up to the employee if they want to opt out. Now, let's say that they don't opt out. They just didn't get around to it. They didn't understand what was required of them or whatever. They get their first paycheck. Hey, what's this deduction out of my paycheck? Now you, their employer, it's your problem. It was deducted out of the paycheck that you gave them. And so now you want to go get the money back, but guess what? It went into an IRA account. You want to get that money back? Now you got to pay a penalty. I mean, so you just get a sense for how much turmoil and strife that this could create. And the fight again, the people in the government, they just assume like everything will work perfectly and everybody will be perfectly informed and all of this stuff will be like regular machinery. And and it won't be like regular private sector machinery. It'll be like regular government machinery, which means it just won't be smooth. And we really do encourage them to nix this idea. In the past, we've had some good success in stopping it, but we will call on you. We'll let you know as it, kind of advances through the system if it does, and we will definitely call on you to raise a flag and say, hey, put the skids on this because it's just not a good it's not a good thing for small business. And if it's not a good thing for small business, it's not a good thing for Michigan.
Now, before we close out today, we did want to make sure that everybody was aware it is almost April now, which means that we are less than a month away from Michigan Celebrates Small Business 2026. We have a pretty fantastic slate of programming set up for April 21st and 22nd. We will be in the Lansing area. I have sent a link to the chat where you can view more information about the program this year, and you can even register. Registration is open. Brian, do you have anything you'd like to add to just encourage people to come out and join us for Michigan Celebrates this year?
If you haven't been to this, there's several events over a couple of days, and you can use it like a menu. You don't have to do everything. You can pick and choose what you want to participate in. But the summit is fantastic. We had so many actual practitioners, small business owners, they're experts in their fields that are they're providing these breakout sessions and they're going to be fabulous. It'd be an opportunity to work on your business. Every day you're working in your business, this is an opportunity to work on your business and to learn more with and from other small business owners. So the summit is going to be fantastic. There's kind of an entertainment session right in the middle, which is a pitch competition. So a $10,000 pitch competition for somebody who has a new idea to expand their business. And the attendees of the summit during the lunch portion are going to hear the pitches, and part of the scoring will be the voting of the audience. It's going to be a lot of fun. The We've got a capital experience as well. So we don't go to the Capitol lobbying on anything. We go to the Capitol to show you how that place works, how the mechanics of the government work, how the rules are made, who makes the rules, and how to insert yourself or to participate in that process. So we're not talking about issues, we're talking about process and how you can be involved in that process. And then the big extravaganza is the gala. It's like a black tie event, a literal red carpet event at the Breslin Center. We take over that entire building. The Breslin Center, it's a really cool, storied place where the Michigan State Spartan basketball team, although it hurts my heart a little bit to say that because of the outcome last weekend, but it is an opportunity to celebrate the award winners, the 50 companies to watch, and several other categories of awards that are given out that night. And it's just a time to celebrate the entrepreneurs that make the economy in Michigan go. If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about, and you're probably already registered, enrolled. If you haven't ever been there before, I promise you it will be worth your time. It's meaningful and deep and productive, but also fun. It checks a lot of boxes, and we encourage you to go. So follow the link, take a look at it, and we'd love to have you there.
And if you're watching this on playback and don't have access to the link, you can go to michigancelebrates.org for more information or visit any of our social media where we are promoting that heavily. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. That's all we have this week. Hope everyone has a great week.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.